Again, welcome everyone. Thanks again for covering Wake Forest football, not just this week, but all season long. And we do appreciate the coverage. So, and I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving week. So, Deacon Nation, all of our students, and especially the members of the press. Just recapping Miami, I was really proud of how hard we competed. And, going into the game, if you said this will be a 6-point game in the fourth quarter, I probably would have taken that and liked our odds. Obviously, in the fourth quarter, we made some critical mistakes that the game got away from us. I think the game was much more competitive than the final score indicated. But credit to Miami. They've done that to a lot of teams. They fell behind against Cal, and it's very similar to their game with Duke. And, Miami kind of has a fourth quarter button they hit, and they've been really good in the fourth quarter this year. And our defense got a bunch of stops. We had really good field position for a number of drives in the second half, and we just never capitalized. So looking forward and moving ahead to Duke. Obviously, it's our last home game. It's an in-state rivalry. It's senior day. And, there's no better way of finishing out our season if we could get a win against the Big Four rival with Duke. I just say this. I think Manny and his staff have done amazing jobs in year one. I think Mike did a really good job of building the program, and they had a number of guys leave when Mike went to A&M. And Manny's done a phenomenal job. Sometimes when you get your second head coaching job, you do it better because you say, okay, looking back, these are things I did right. These are things I wouldn't do again. And, I would guess that Rhett Lashley at SMU will probably be the ACC Coach of the Year. But I certainly think Manny is right up there in terms of deserving consideration. I think he's done a great job. It really starts with their defense. They've generated 25 turnovers this year, which I think is second in the country or third in the country. They're very disruptive at all three levels of the defense. They've got two defensive ends, Williams and Anthony, that are very disruptive. They have a really good secondary. They're very multiple back there. They do a lot of different things, and they do it well. But they have a clear defensive philosophy, and they don't give up a lot of yards. They don't give up a lot of points, but they're exceptional on third down, and they're the best in the country in the red zone. I think they've given up the fewest red zone touchdowns of anybody in the country. Teams only score touchdowns less than half the time against them in the red zone, and it's not an accident. They have a really, really good plan down there. Offensively, Murphy's been a good quarterback for him. He throws a beautiful deep ball, and it helps when you have receivers on the outside like Moore and Pankwell. Those guys they're top of the league. They're both graduate guys. They've been there for a lot of years. They were recruited by David Cutcliffe, and they're still there. So that's, 3 coaches ago. And those guys are outstanding players. The running back they got out of the portal, Star Thomas, has been a really good back. They lost the Waters guy to NC State, which I thought would be a really big loss for them. But Star Thomas is a good player. He's got 750 yards. He's a good back. It just seems like anybody who got an offensive player from New Mexico State last year is now having a good season. So I'm sure that makes those guys thrilled. Everyone will be looking at their roster again this year. But you look at what those guys have done at Vanderbilt and what he's done at Duke. They obviously had a really good scheme and players at New Mexico State. So, again, it's senior day. We'll have a list later, between the COVID year and redshirting and injuries. You kind of lose track who's a senior. Hopefully in 2 years we'll get back to, okay, these are seniors, last year of eligibility. So, I'll probably be out there for like a half an hour before the game. I think we'll have like 36 players, so we're probably going to have to change in the future, like, okay, who do we recognize? But in fairness to the players, if they've spent 4 years here, even if they have 2 years left, some of these guys aren't 100% sure if they're coming back or not. And so, the focus is on this week and this game and trying to finish on a high note against a rival, and then we'll deal with all those other things next week. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Dave, out of the players that we know are leaving because their eligibility is just exhausted, talk about the impact, if you would, of someone like Taylor Morin, not just as a receiver, but his punt returns, his kind of stability.
Yeah, Taylor's had a really interesting career, and his first year here was 19. So he was part of the 19 season that he redshirted. He didn't play, but he saw what was capable in this offense, because that year, that's a year I look back at and say, what could have been? Because we were 6-1 and ranked in the country, and then we lost Scotty against NC State, and then we lost Sage against Virginia Tech and Kendall. But you look back at that team, and Kenneth Walker's your tailback, and Kendall Hinton, who's a pro, is your slot, and Scotty Washington and Sage Surratt, who are pros, are your outside receivers. Zach Tom is your center. That was a really good team. And then Taylor was one of those guys that kind of, through the COVID year, I think from Luke Masterson and other guys, kind of learned what leadership looks like. And then in 21, when we lost Donnie, Taylor jumped to the outside and started for us all year, and was a really good outside receiver. And he's close to getting the all-time yardage record, the all-time receptions record. That's probably, he'd have to have a heck of a game to get that one. But he's just had a great career, and he's the same person every day. Early in his career, he didn't stay healthy, and he's learned what it takes to stay healthy. Jasheen Davis has had a really great career here. I don't know, where is he on the TFL list? He's second. Devontae Gordon's another guy that, we had an injury in 21, and all of a sudden he's our starting right tackle. And just, 21, 22, 23, 24 has just been a model of consistency for us. Give me the other names. I really, it's hard to keep track of who's, Kendron Wayman, I think, has had a really good career. Evan Slocum has had a really good career, good special teams player, versatile, has played nickel, safety. We didn't have him play corner last year in the Syracuse game. Cam Height has done a really good job. He's played a lot of football for us the last 3 years. I always remember the touchdown he got against Vanderbilt in 22, and how upset Blake Whitehart was that he wasn't in for that play. And I told Blake, Cam's from Tennessee, and we wanted to get him a touchdown. And he's like, I'm like, I'm kidding. It just so happened that he was in there. So a lot of good players that, we're here in 19, helped us get through the COVID year. And then really we're here when we hit our peak in 21 and 22. And I think because they were there for those years, they realize what this program can be and the level we want to get back to. Does that answer your question?
So, Dave, what did you think of when you heard that Mack Brown is now no longer coach?
I like Mack. It's kind of funny in the league, and I get along with Dave Doran fine, and Cutcliffe and I always got along well, but we didn't play North Carolina every year. We went a lot of years without playing them, so it always seemed like it was always easier for the Wake and the North Carolina coach to be friendly, and then the Duke and the State coach to be friendly, because those teams didn't play each other. It's like when you'd go up to, in the old days, you'd go up to ESPN for the car wash, right? And, Cut and Dave would fly up together, and Larry and I would fly up together, because it was okay. You didn't, most years you didn't play them. So even though it's a rivalry, it doesn't feel like a rivalry when you didn't play a team every year. And, because of how long I've been in the league and how long I've been a head coach, I think Mack and I in the league were the two coaches that we'd coached the most games as head coaches. And I think because of that and how long we'd be head coaches, a lot of times in ACC meetings, we kind of came from things from the same standpoint. And we did. We developed a friendship. And I like him a lot. I think he's good for college football. It's just unfortunate. It just seems nowadays people never ever get to leave on their own terms. And, it's part of the business. I get it. But when there's somebody like that you like and respect, you wish it could have ended a different way. But I don't know enough about what goes on there. But I have a lot of respect for Bubba. I think he's a great AD and he's a friend, and I think the world of Mack. So, but when you do this as long as I've done it, and he's done it even longer, it's okay, what's next? So I'm sure that we'll remain friends, and it'll probably be easier to have conversations now that we're not recruiting the same kids or coaching against each other.
Follow up to that question, because that's twice in the past couple of weeks you've said Mack is good for college football. What is it about him or the way he approaches things that makes him good for college football?
I just think there's a new generation of head coaches that have gotten in this for the money and view the players in a very transactional way. And I do believe Mack genuinely cared about his players. Whether he had the right offense or right defense or this and that, but I think at his heart, when he says that what he loved about the job is sitting and having lunch with a young man and helping him through problems, I think there's a certain percentage of head coaches now, they would say something like that and everyone knows it's just a line. I think with him, that's really the way he was wired. I think he valued his relationships with players. I think he truly cared about kids. I know the recent developments of college football frustrated him. And I probably, some of the new head coaches that came up with it being this way, they're probably more in tune, or, it's become a much more transactional profession. And I think we get that. We understand that. I think next week we're going to learn a lot about that here, right, with revenue sharing. But when you got into coaching, in my case, 36 years ago, or in his case, whether it was 45 or 50 years ago, people just need to understand that, whatever he was making at North Carolina, when you got into coaching that long ago, coaches didn't make money. Like you got into this almost like a teacher. Like a lot of people got into coaching, you were either going to get an education or you wanted to become a coach. And you never got into it with the thought that you were going to make money. And even though we do make money now, and none of us have turned it down, our heart and our soul of why we got into it hasn't changed. And that's why my favorite part of the job, I always say, and I've told this to the players, the reason I love coaching is three things. It's the relationships, it's the moments, and the memories. And the moments become memories because of the relationships, because you're doing things with people that you truly care about and that you're invested in, and you have this long relationship with. At Fordham, our first year there, we were 0-11, and then to win 10 games 4 years later with that same group that went 0-11, and that you went through all those hard times together, is what makes it rewarding. Winning the Military Bowl in 16 and the Belk Bowl in 17 against Texas A&M with a bunch of players that went 3-9 and 3-9, and John Wolford and Cam Serenay and all those guys. Having the whole adventure with them and going through the whole process with them, like, to me, the memory of the Belk Bowl isn't necessarily holding a trophy after beating Texas A&M, but it's all those moments afterwards in the locker room where you hug a player and he tells you he loves you and you tell him you love him back, and it's meaningful. I mean, John Wolford was on the sidelines with us at the Miami game, and just to see him, it's just, wow, get over here. Like, he gave me a handshake. I'm like, we don't handshake, John, we hug. I love that about the job. And I think that's what Mack loved about it. And, you can still love that part about it, but there's not going to be as many. It's just where this thing is going. There's not going to be as many of those guys that stick through the 2 or 3 hard years to get the rewards at the end. So many players now, if they don't have the exact role they want by year 2 or year 3, they're probably going to leave. And in some cases it works out for them, in some cases it doesn't. With a lot of the guys that left, I think if they had just stayed here one more year and been patient, their role here probably would have been what they wanted it to be.
So then, Coach, then piggybacking off of that, what does senior day mean for you then? Because, this is the last time you're going to be coaching these young men who have been in your program for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I after senior day, senior day is, Devontae Gordon, blah, 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 blah. He walks down, handshake from John, the president hugs him. That's just a moment. But when the thing is all over with some of those players, like Kendall Hinton, I can remember, all the crap we went through with him, and when he was walking down there, he just got a big smile on his face. He goes, "I didn't think we'd ever get here. Did you, Coach?" And I'm like, "No, but I'm really glad we did." And so after the senior day, not with all of them, I love our transfers we brought in, and a lot of those guys were 1 years, but it's not, there's not the same depth of a relationship with those guys. I thank them for coming and trusting us with their last year, but a guy like Taylor Marin or Devontae Gordon, who gave us 6 years, Michael Kern, who gave us 6 years and is just one of the most unselfish players I've ever coached. I do. I get a little bit emotional when I see those guys realizing this is it. This is the last time. And, even though you stay in touch with a lot of them, it's never, ever the same. It's forever different.
Dave, with this game, the last game of the year, is there talk of maybe playing a lot of the more younger guys?
No, we'll have an off season and a spring and a fall camp to get those guys ready. We owe it to our seniors and our program to try to, this is our last game, our last home game, the last game for the seniors, and I want those guys walking out with a great memory. So we're going to treat this like it's a playoff game, and I know, there's like probably a 1% chance if we win and all these other teams lose, our APR and our grades are still high enough that we're one of the first teams that would get in at 5 and 7. But that's, I know that's extremely unlikely this year just because of how many teams are eligible, and we'd need a lot of massive upsets to happen.
Dave, you mentioned that in a week or so you're going to learn about the portal, how these kind of transactions are happening. How much harder is it to kind of keep some of these guys when you've had back-to-back years of ad, and how much easier is it now? I think John Perry came out and stated last week about Wick's stance on what revenue sharing is. How much easier is it with that?
Yeah, I think, really, Cam, those are unknowns, right? So we've never dealt with a portal situation with revenue share ever before in the history of college athletics. So, all those things we're going to find out about in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks. I think we're all over college football, coaches, athletic directors. It's a brave new frontier, and we're all going to be going through this together for the first time. And I'm sure it won't be boring.
Maybe what you said about younger players, which also mentioned Michael Kern. Is there a thought to get him a drive or two?
Again, Connor, I'm playing the game to win it. I'm playing the game as if I'm not going to manage this game any differently than I managed BC in 21. We want to play the game to win it. And Michael's played this year, but I mean, there's certainly a chance he's going to play. But you know, I know there's coaches in basketball that the first possession. I don't do that. I think it's nice, it's sentimental, but you need to play this game to win the game, just like you would any other game. I think every game, Cam, you manage differently, right? I mean, you know, Miami was the #1 offense in the country. And to me, if we could make first downs and stay on the field and stay in that game and give ourselves a chance to win it, you know, Duke's a different team. They're winning a little bit more on defense. They're winning a little bit more on turnovers. I think every game you play it differently and you manage it differently, unless you're just flat out better than everybody. You know, like in 21, you know, we talk about close games. In 21, we hardly had any close games. We blew everybody out rather than, I think, the games we won. I think the only close game was maybe Louisville and one other game. Syracuse in overtime. I mean, Army was closer than the score indicated, but, you know, I think you always look at the game and say, okay, what are our relative strengths? What are their relative strengths? What's the path to win this game? And the path to win this game is different than the path to win the Miami game. And that was going to be different than the path to win the North Carolina game. And so, you know, maybe it's the same, maybe it's different. You know, I'm not going to announce on a Tuesday press conference what our game plan is. You know, Duke's a good football team. They're 8-3. They're extremely well coached. Like I said earlier, Manny and his staff have done a phenomenal job. I mean, it's just, you know, they've won close games. They create turnovers. They're doing all those little things to win in the margins. And this will be a challenging game. I mean, they have a chance to go 9-3. So that was kind of where Duke was when I first got here. You know, they've done a really, you know, it's a different Duke team. You know, they've got 15 transfers and they're too deep in offense and defense. And, you know, 10 years ago, Duke, I don't think could have got transfers. So they're obviously, you know, they've adjusted very well, you know, the last 3 years to modern football. You know, they've got a quarterback that came from Texas, and you know, they got a lot of Ivy League and those type of players as grad students on the O-line. And they had good players. I mean, some of these players, David Cutcliffe recruited, and they've been really good players for them. So they've done a really nice job of taking what their base was and evaluating well and adding to it in a very smart way.
Dave, I know you got one more game to play, but how do you characterize this season? Is it near misses or what?
I would say this. In some ways, this feels a little bit like 2015. You know, when we've played the elite teams, the Ole Misses, we've played 3 top 10 teams this year. And even though the Miami game was, I think, more competitive with the score, you know, for the most part, when we've played the top 10 teams, you know, those haven't ended up as competitive games. You know, we kind of blew out our FCS game, and then every other game has been a one-score game. You know, and it's kind of where we are. I think we're certainly a lot more competitive than we were a year ago. I think, you know, the schedule every year, you never know, but, you know, Ole Miss, it's obviously a really good team. If you look at the ACC, the top 3 teams, we got 2 of them. You know, I think, and I think we're kind of, I think last year we were in the bottom of the league and we were non-competitive, and we won 1 ACC game, and a lot of games we weren't even competitive in. If you look at this year's season, we're a lot more competitive. We're in a lot more games. The disappointment is we didn't find ways to win more of them. So it feels like every game this year I've been, managing a score or a lead or a clock in the fourth quarter. And last year, I mean, you name the game: Florida State, Notre Dame, North Carolina State, Virginia Tech. I mean, those games are over with 20 minutes left. So I do think we were more competitive. I think we're a better team than we were a year ago. Right now, the record doesn't reflect that. But I think our competitiveness in those games was better. But, that's not a lot of consolation. It's different year 11 than year 2.
How much have you allowed yourself to think about what it's going to take to get back to and kind of get back on the right track from 2015 going in, started the bowl streak? What's it going to take? What's been your thought process now?
Well, I think the thought process, again, you look at it holistically, okay, and what we did, Connor, is we developed a really, really good mousetrap to win at Wake Forest, right? Our 7-year run, you could argue, was the best 7-year run in the history of Wake Forest football since we joined the ACC in 1953. Okay, these last 2 years, for reasons I've talked about, have been extremely challenging. I think we're going to get back to a little bit of an even playing field with revenue share. So we've got to figure out our mousetrap and how that works in the new era of college football. But my excitement is, we're not going to be behind the 8 ball as much. And again, whether fans believe this or not, whether writers believe this or not, okay, to say that name, image, and likeness money doesn't matter in college football right now is insane. All right? I mean, you look at the teams right now competing for a national championship in the playoffs that are at the top of every league, okay, and all of those schools are very, very well funded. Okay, and we are going to be on a much more even playing field starting next year. So again, when I took the job, I always said, as long as we have 85 and they have 85, all those other little differences don't bother me. To me, as long as we had 85 and they had 85, I truly believed we can be competitive and we could find a way to compete for championships and consistently go to bowl games. The last 2 years have made it more challenging. It's become a little bit of a harder job. I think a lot of people across the country that are in jobs similar to this have had the same challenges. And I think we're all excited with revenue sharing that, it's not going to be completely even, but you're not going to have the disparity that has happened the last 2 years. So how do we figure out our mousetrap starting next year with it's different again. So there's been more change in college football the last 2 years than probably the previous 50. And again, I deserve criticism. I'm the head coach. People can certainly argue, boy, he hasn't handled this well, he hasn't adapted, and I guess that's fair criticism. The only thing I would say is to adapt to it, it's really hard to adapt to this if you don't have a certain amount of resources. And again, thanks to John Curry, thanks to our president, I think we're going to be in much better shape moving forward.
Dave, to follow up on that, in the way you're going to build that mousetrap, in past years you kind of, after season's over, kind of taken like a deep dive look at the things you need to fix to be competitive the following season.
Mm-hmm.
Given the fact that you're in so many one-score games and you feel the field will be more level with revenue sharing, do you think that your off-season moves will be kind of tweaks or maybe more some wholesale?
I think it's wholesale. It's got to be wholesale, right? We're going to have a completely different budget than we've had. And so this is a little bit of, the new nature of college athletics, right? We're just not, we want to keep most of our football team, but the retention aspect is only a part of it now. It's it's finding players and adding the right people in the right spots, and at the same time maintaining a Wake Forest integrity to how we do things. Our APR score is still going to be important here. GPA still matters to me. Most people don't care about graduation rates. I still do. And that doesn't mean you can't pay players, and players are going to get paid, and they're going to make a lot of money. But I still think our degree and our education has to factor in there a little bit, or else nothing distinguishes us from other people. There's still got to be value in what the institution is. And now, with that value, we also have to be competitive in the marketplace of what we pay people. So again, I know, I always feel like when I dive into this subject, at some point I'm going to be misquoted or misconstrued, and that it bothers me. Well, coach said this, and why? I believe we can compete. I believe we can win. And at the same time, the last 2 years have been really, really challenging. And I think brighter days are ahead.
So is it likely then that you're going to look at both? You talk about this a lot, who you're doing it with, but also what you're doing with them too, probably.
Well, that's always coaching, right? It's always, what do you do? And what you do is dictated by who you do it with. And I think, retaining some of our key players, whether it's Damon Claiborne or Luke Pettibone or Matt Gulbin, or that's going to be really, really critical. And at the same time, to replace a Jasheen Davis and a Kendron Wayman, our defensive line and secondary, we're going to have to be out there looking for kids and be very aggressive and very competitive in our offers and who we recruit to fix that side of the ball. So we're very aware of what our problems are, and we know what we need to do to fix them. I think the great unknown is, what is the marketplace, right?
Just to follow up with that, you talked about on the player side of it. Has there been any sort of discussion or anything to look at who will the guys that are recruiting, not just yourself, but just your staff in general?
I mean, the portal's not open yet, Cam. So, we don't recruit players from other teams after games, unlike some of our opponents. So, Damon certainly had a lot of friends on the Miami staff afterwards. I didn't know all those guys knew him so well.
Anything else, guys? All right, thanks.
All right, thanks.